This day, for Palm Sunday, we remember and we're reminded that Jesus is absolutely a new kind of king. Jesus isn't the ordinary king, the ordinary leader that folks would have expected from Rome, say Pontius Pilate especially. Jesus is a humble king, riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Now, humility is one of those tricky words that sometimes I think that we get a false sense of humility, and we may not really be humble. So the way that I like to understand humility and being humble is when we are humble, we don't think less of ourselves, but when we are humble, we think about ourselves less. So we don't degrade ourselves. Degrading one another is not a spirit of humility. If I stand up here and I put myself down, I wouldn't say Eric's humble. I would say Eric needs to work with a counselor. But instead, when we think about ourselves less, when I recognize that life isn't about me, that life is about us, that is more of a sense of humility. Jesus is all about humility, especially portrayed in this Palm Sunday reading. He is about radically loving creation into relationship with God, and as such, he doesn't think less about himself, but thinks of himself less often than he does serving those in need and being present to them. To that effect, he rides into Jerusalem on an unridden donkey. That's a detail we often forget. And not even just an unridden donkey, but it was borrowed at that. This wasn't even Jesus' own donkey. It was a borrowed donkey. Jesus isn't showing any authority. He isn't showing any power. And then I got to thinking about that. Well, he borrowed it. That's kind of innovative. That's not Jesus' point, to be like Jesus, chief innovator. It wasn't about innovation. He was riding in on an unridden donkey that would have been a miserable nightmare of a ride. His ride would have been far from easy. That donkey would have been uneasy with the rider on it for the first time and would have acted as such. It would be uncertain. Contrast that with Pilate. So we have Jesus coming in the east, and Jesus is very smart and knows that this time of year, Pilate comes in from the west. Pilate rides in on a majestic and on a mighty, as tall as you can get, war horse. The kind of horse you see that is rippling with muscles in its legs and its back. It's a thing of beauty. Pilate made the trip to Jerusalem this time each year not to pay respect on this high holy day, but rather to assert his power, really to keep people in check, if you will. There wasn't a thing about Pontius Pilate that expressed humility. Pilate operated out of a need for control. He operated out of a need to suppress the people, to make sure that the people of Jerusalem remember who is in charge. And for Pilate, that didn't have anything to do about Judaism or about Jesus or about the Pharisees. For Pilate, that was about Rome. Pilate's ride into Jerusalem lacked humility. He was all about taking care of Pilate. Now, Jesus' kingship is still unique to us today. Still countercultural today, too. I think it's easy for us in our modern mind to look back and think of what Israel expected as a king back in centuries ago and think, well, they missed it. They didn't realize what kind of kingship Jesus was going to get, and we can think about that intellectually. But I think today it's easy to separate ourselves from that, to distance ourselves. Today, every bit as much as yesterday, Jesus is to be king of our lives, and he's a king of this love and compassion and this humility. I'll be honest with you. Jesus isn't about riding in on a limousine. And I don't think that Jesus would have come in fancy fare. He wouldn't come in a tank. He wouldn't come in a Porsche, whatever your dream vehicle is. No. Jesus is still every bit about witnessing through love and service and vulnerability today as he was back then. He's still about speaking truth to power. And that is a hard thing for a lot of us. And speaking truth to power, what is that about? Sometimes we get uncomfortable when the priest says truth to power. Today he's about sharing life through humble means. I think it's where we get challenged with this truth to power piece. I share a quote in a moment from Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan out of their book, The Last Week. And the only time that I like to share a quote is when I can't say it better. And I definitely can't say it better than what these co-authors wrote. They write, Pilate's procession embodied the power, glory, and violence of the empire that ruled the world. Jesus' procession embodied an alternative vision, the kingdom of God. Holy Week and the journey of Lent are about an alternative procession, an alternative journey, an anti-imperial and non-violent procession. Then they ask, which journey are we on? Which procession are we in? It can be easy to distance ourselves from godly vulnerability today because we separate self from Jesus' actions. If given the choice between mighty war horse or bucking donkey, most of us, I think if we're being honest, would say, yeah, give me the war horse. I can manageably ride that once you get on it. We want safety. We want control, security. Really, we want the easier way. We want the way that we know, right? The way of Christ, though, is through shouting hosannas, while Jesus processes and even protests his way into Jerusalem to stand and to suffer for and in love with creation. I say protest, and we wonder, what do you mean protest? This is his triumphant entry. What's that about? The Pharisees there near the end, silence your disciples. Get them to stop shouting. And Jesus responds, if these were silent, the stones would still shout, right? Jesus knows Pilate's coming in the other direction. Jesus knows this reality of Roman suppression. And Jesus is coming in exactly opposite of the way that Pilate came in. For Jesus is a new kind of king, a king of self-surrendering love, leading to freedom. But first, Jesus rides in love and in humility into Jerusalem. Amen? Amen.